The federal courtroom went silent. Everyone watched as an unexpected clash unfolded between two powerful figures. Judge William Alsup, famous for his sharp legal mind and tough style, had just done something shocking during Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's presentation of evidence. Crockett was explaining how a chemical company had poisoned a minority community's water supply for decades when the 78-year-old judge suddenly smiled. It was small but clear, and everyone saw it. Crockett, once a civil rights lawyer and now a member of Congress, stopped speaking. At the podium in her navy blue suit with gold trim, she looked straight at the judge. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "does the poisoning of American children seem funny to you?" The room shifted instantly. Corporate lawyers whispered nervously. Reporters scribbled quickly. Families in the audience who had lived through cancer and birth defects leaned forward, shocked that someone had finally spoken up. The judge's grin disappeared. For the first time in his career, he looked at a loss for words. What happened next would change the fight for environmental justice in America and show that sometimes speaking the truth to power is the only way the law can truly protect everyone. Judge Alsup had built his reputation on decades of complicated cases in California. He had been appointed in 1999 by President Clinton. Born in Mississippi, he had studied math and worked as an engineer before law school. He even taught himself computer programming to understand one of the country's biggest tech cases. He was known for independence, ruling against both Republicans and Democrats when he thought they went too far. He had little patience for dramatic speeches and preferred clear facts and strong legal reasoning. At 78, with wire-rimmed glasses and a stern look, he seemed like a man who had seen every trick. On the other side stood Jasmine Crockett. She had asked for special permission to argue this case because it mattered deeply to the people she once represented. Before Congress, she had been a civil rights lawyer in Texas, winning cases against polluters who poisoned poor communities. This case involved a company accused of dumping toxic chemicals into groundwater for decades in a mostly Black and Hispanic neighborhood. Despite cancer and birth defects, the company had avoided blame for years. Now the case was finally in front of Judge Alsup, a man with the science and legal knowledge to understand it. The timing was critical. The Supreme Court had just limited the EPA's power, so this case was one of the first big tests of whether courts could still protect communities when regulators failed. The stakes were national. The contrast between the two was clear. Alsup in his black robe on the bench, Crockett at the podium speaking for a forgotten community. Crockett began showing proof. Maps of cancer clusters, company documents admitting they knew the risks, and data showing chemical levels thousands of times above safe limits. She explained that executives decided it was cheaper to pay fines than fix the problem. Alsup interrupted. "Are you saying every company that ever went over the limit should pay forever?" Crockett replied calmly, "No, Your Honor. I'm saying this company chose to poison this community on purpose because they thought no one would stop them." She then showed emails where executives said the neighborhood lacked political power. She presented health data showing rare cancers 6 times higher than normal. The judge said, "Courts need proof of cause, not just emotion." Crockett answered, "I've shown peer-reviewed studies proving causation. This is not emotion. This is evidence, then it happened." As she cited legal precedent, Judge Alsup smiled again like he was dismissing her argument. Reporters looked up. The audience froze. Crockett stopped. "I'm curious, Your Honor," she said firmly. "Does the poisoning of poor communities make you laugh?" The room went silent. The judge's smile vanished. "The precedent you cite was later limited," he said defensively. Then explained that instead of smiling, Crockett shot back. "Because families who buried their children deserve more than a grin." She pressed forward. "And since you find my case amusing, let's look at your own words." Her team displayed a quote from one of Alsup's past rulings on the screen. She read it aloud. "When corporations have proof of harm and continue dangerous practices, courts must ensure that legal technicalities do not block justice." The words hung in the air. The judge's face turned serious. Crockett looked him in the eye. "That was your standard, Judge Alsup," she said. "And today, I've shown clear evidence that this company not only knew about the harm they were causing, but also hid it while continuing to dump cancer-causing chemicals into this community's water." Judge Alsup shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. He flipped through his notes, trying to respond. "The circumstances in Sierra Club were very different," he began. But Crockett was ready. "Different facts, same legal principle," she replied, showing another quote. "In your 2019 speech to the Environmental Law Conference, you said that consistency in applying legal principles is the foundation of judicial legitimacy." I couldn't agree more. The courtroom was silent. Even the corporate lawyers had stopped writing. Community members exchanged hopeful looks. "Let me be clear," Crockett continued. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the exact legal standard you yourself used in Sierra Club. If we apply it the same way, this case must go to trial." She turned toward the courtroom. "The evidence shows that over 300 families have suffered terrible health problems, not from bad luck or unknown causes, but because a company decided their lives were worth less than the cost of safe waste disposal." Crockett delivered her strongest point. "Access to justice is not a technical detail, Your Honor. It is the foundation of our legal system. When you grin at arguments about environmental justice, you are not just dismissing me. You are dismissing the principle that corporations cannot poison Americans just because they are poor." She paused, looking directly at the judge. "I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for consistency. Apply the standard you set in Sierra Club. Follow the evidence. If you do, there is only one conclusion. This case deserves its day in court." The impact was clear. Judge Alsup stopped writing and listened closely. His earlier dismissive look was gone. The corporate lawyers were scribbling notes, worried. Judge Alsup cleared his throat. "Thank you, Congresswoman Crockett. Does opposing counsel wish to respond?" The lead lawyer for the company stood. "Your Honor, Ms. Crockett's emotional appeals should not distract from the legal issues. The statute of limitations clearly." Alsup cut him off, his tone different now. "I'm more interested in the internal documents. Your client's executives knew about groundwater contamination as early as 1987, but kept the same practices until 2008. How does that meet the good faith requirement under environmental laws?" The lawyer looked caught off guard. "Well, Your Honor, those documents need to be seen in context. The context looks like a plan to hide contamination," Alsup pressed. "Ms. Crockett's team also showed memos about avoiding regulators. That is deeply troubling." The shift was dramatic. The same judge who had smiled at Crockett's arguments was now grilling the company's lawyers. For 20 minutes, he asked sharp questions about what the company knew, how they tracked health problems, and why they kept dumping chemicals despite the risks. The defense had weak answers. Then Alsup turned back to Crockett. "Congresswoman, you've raised serious questions about whether the statute of limitations applies given the evidence of concealment. I want more briefing on that issue." Legal experts in the courtroom knew what that meant. If concealment was proven, the company could not use the statute of limitations to escape blame. It meant the judge was seriously considering letting the case move forward. "Of course, Your Honor," Crockett replied. "We can file by the end of the week." As the hearing ended, something remarkable happened. Judge Alsup looked at the community members, the families who had lost children, the parents of kids born with defects, the residents who couldn't drink their water. "This court understands the seriousness of the claims made today," he said. "While I make no final judgment now, these families deserve a fair hearing. The motion to dismiss is denied. This case will go to trial." The gallery gasped and cried softly. Families held hands and wiped away tears. They had waited over 10 years for this chance, and at last the court had not shut them out. As Crockett gathered her papers, community leaders came forward to thank her. This was more than a legal win. It was proof the system could still work. The judge, who had once smiled at their suffering, had been changed by the evidence and by Crockett's fearless challenge. That evening, clips of the courtroom exchange spread quickly online. The moment when Crockett asked the judge, "Does the poisoning of poor communities strike you as humorous?" was viewed over 2 million times within hours. Legal experts and activists began debating the case everywhere. "One of the most powerful moments in years," said one legal analyst. Crockett didn't just win an argument. She redefined how environmental justice cases are framed. Critics argued that challenging a federal judge so directly was inappropriate. But even they admitted Crockett's strategy was effective. By the next morning, 3 other judges had denied motions to dismiss in similar cases, citing Alsup's ruling. Before this case, companies had a playbook: delay, hide evidence, then claim the statute of limitations. Crockett and Alsup had just broken that playbook. The political impact was immediate. Stalled environmental bills gained new support. Lawmakers saw that standing with polluters could now cost them politically. In the community, town halls filled with people sharing stories of loss and hope. Local health officials began new screenings, and engineers planned water cleanup. "For the first time in 30 years, our community feels seen," said Maria Gonzalez, who lost both parents to cancer. "We told our stories for decades. No one listened. Until now, the chemical company's stock crashed. Investors worried about liability. Lawsuits followed. Executives faced resignations and emergency meetings. The case had started with a dismissive smile. It ended with a judge's decision that gave power back to a community long ignored. Industry magazines warned other companies to review their own environmental practices. The Alsup ruling, as it was quickly called, was described as a possible turning point for corporate accountability. Legal seminars were organized to teach companies how to manage environmental liability in this new situation. Meanwhile, environmental justice advocates across the country used the momentum. Community groups in Cancer Alley in Louisiana, polluted neighborhoods in East Chicago, and indigenous communities near uranium mines all filed new legal cases, citing the Alsup precedent. "What Congresswoman Crockett did goes beyond one case," said a veteran environmental lawyer. "She showed that the law can work for environmental justice communities if advocates are willing to hold both corporations and courts to their own standards." 3 weeks after the hearing, the chemical company surprised legal observers by offering a settlement. Instead of years of discovery that could reveal decades of wrongdoing, they offered $780 million for health care, property cleanup, and direct payments to families. The offer included unusual transparency rules. Unlike most corporate settlements with confidentiality clauses, this one required the company to release all internal documents about the contamination, create an independent monitoring system, and fund research on the health effects of TCE. The community debated for 3 days on whether to accept. Some wanted a trial, hoping for more money and harsher punishment. Others feared the company might declare bankruptcy to avoid liability if the case dragged on. In the end, they voted to accept the settlement with one key change. They demanded a formal public admission of wrongdoing by the company, something almost never seen in environmental cases. Under strong evidence and public pressure, the company agreed. Judge Alsup held a public hearing to review the settlement. When the courtroom filled, observers noticed a clear change in him. His earlier dismissive attitude was gone, replaced by serious attention as community members told their stories. After hours of testimony, Alsup spoke. "This settlement is an important step toward justice," he said. "Oh, but its true meaning is more than money. It recognizes that no community should suffer more environmental harm just because they lack political or economic power." He looked at the company executives. "It is also a reminder that corporations cannot treat environmental laws as a cost-benefit decision. Human lives are not numbers on a balance sheet." Then he addressed his own actions. "This court wishes to recognize Congresswoman Crockett's advocacy. Her willingness to hold not just the defendants but this court to the highest standards of legal consistency reflects the finest traditions of the bar. She reminded us that justice must not only be done, but be seen to be done, without prejudice or dismissal of any community." Alsup looked at the residents. "Most importantly, I thank the community members who fought for decades to be heard. Your persistence in the face of indifference is the true reason we are here today." Legal scholars later called this statement remarkable for its humility and self-reflection. Settlement was carried out quickly. Within months, new water filtration systems were installed in homes. A medical center specializing in environmental illness opened in the community. Property values began to rise again as cleanup progressed. For Crockett, the case meant more than a legal victory. On national television, she explained, "This wasn't about embarrassing Judge Alsup. It was about making sure environmental justice isn't just theory. It's applied in real courtrooms for real people." She added, "Sometimes securing justice means speaking uncomfortable truths, even to those in power." When a judge grins at arguments about people dying from corporate pollution, that must be challenged, not out of disrespect for the court, but out of respect for the law's promise of equal justice. The case became central in legal education. Harvard Law School created a seminar on how Crockett had used a judge's own words to reshape environmental justice law. The course, Speaking Truth to Power, Advocacy and Environmental Justice, became one of the most popular electives nationwide. What makes the Alsup Crockett exchange so valuable, explained a professor, is that it shows how to answer institutional dismissiveness without losing legal substance. Crockett didn't just call out the judge's grin, she backed it with legal precedent. The case's legacy grew. Law schools taught it. Courts cited the Alsup standard in many later pollution cases. The EPA responded with new guidelines on pollution in disadvantaged areas. States created stronger groundwater monitoring near factories. Most notably, Judge Alsup himself changed. Before retiring, he became known as a strong voice for environmental justice. He wrote major opinions expanding access for harmed communities and often spoke about judges examining their own biases. He started a mentorship program pairing judges with environmental advocates, helping the judiciary understand contaminated communities. Though controversial at first, it spread nationwide. Asked later about his shift, Alsup said, "Sometimes it takes someone brave enough to call out a momentary lapse to make you see a blind spot. Congresswoman Crockett did that for me, and the law is better for it. Judges aren't immune from bias. We may think certain communities or cases deserve less attention. Confronting that tendency is essential for equal justice." The chemical company also changed. With new leadership, it invested in safer technologies and cleanup. Surprisingly, it began supporting stronger environmental regulations, saying clear rules were better for business than the old patchwork system. 5 years later, when Crockett visited a community center funded by the settlement, an elderly woman approached her. "I saw my grandson graduate high school last week," she said, crying. "The doctors said he wouldn't live past 10 because of birth defects from the water. But treatment from the settlement saved him. You didn't just win a case, you saved our future." For Crockett, that moment summed up why challenging power, even at great risk, was worth it. The case didn't just set a legal precedent. It changed lives. 10 years later, the community was renewed. Where empty houses and closed businesses once stood, there were now parks, gardens, and thriving shops. The medical center had become a national hub for environmental health research. Cancer rates returned to normal. Children grew up without fear of sickness, and it all started with a dismissive grin answered by a fearless reply.